Would anyone like to hazard a guess how much the average Chelsea Flower Show garden, so one of the big ones really, because that's the big numbers, how much one costs? This lady's wearing.
About 200 to 250,000.
How do you know that? Because I've just signed the cheque, so I know. She's right. The minimum is about £250,000. It can go up. Depends how much money you want to spend, how many big plants you want. So where does all that money go? Well, some of those designers have got the most amazing houses. No, that's not true. That is actually not true. So let's think about it. We are going back to how many's, but there are a lot of plants in a Chelsea Flower Show garden. They're grown by absolute specialists who are really passionate, and I'm going to demonstrate this to you. So if you take one of those gardens, they look like they've been there forever. That requires a huge volume. So if I said to you that in those gardens you're going to see 4,000 plants, would you think I were lying? Higher. Sometimes it's slightly higher. It's an extraordinary number. And in order to get them ready for the show, there's a huge amount of back work. So already the Royal Horticultural Society are typing up the application forms for next year, which sometimes is a little bit heartbreaking because we're still in love with the thing we've made, but we know we've got to make something else. So nurserymen are getting very excited because they're going to have these huge, vast orders. If I want 30 peonies in peak flower for the judges, the dreaded judges, then how many am I really going to be asking the nurserymen to grow for me? It's roughly about 200. And if I don't buy all 200 myself, then he's going to have to sell them on to somebody else to make a living, and all of a sudden you've got the most amazing trend. So I've ruined that for you. There are no such things as trend, it's just vast numbers of unique plants going into it. The average herbaceous perennial, beautifully grown for Chelsea, is about £20. So it kind of, when you next walk around a beautiful garden centre or a nursery and you think, golly, it's quite expensive for £7. It's actually really not expensive, and probably the tea and the coffee you have on the way home will cost more, but it would have cost the person growing it far less, because people loving plants are up to the middle of the night making sure these are beautiful things. So you've got lots of plants on trolleys, and if you ever get to see it during build, they are the most extraordinary Dutch trolleys. So ordinarily it's just shelves of metal and the plants are all on it, and it gets wheeled in very quickly and it gets put out for sale. But at Chelsea it's not quite like that. So depending on what you've got, they've got special shade blankets around them so they stay cool. If it's a very delicate flower, it's been wrapped literally in cotton wool with little sticks holding it all together. And sometimes if they're very tall plants and they're slightly fragile, you can only get 2 on a trolley. So you end up with gardens with like 60 trolleys around them with these shade nets and cotton wool and people agonising over what they're doing. That's one element. Of course, you'll know, even if you're not gardeners, that everything doesn't stop here in a garden. So you've got bigger things that you need to source and find. So averagely, a shrub takes a few years to grow. Where are you going to get a 10-year-old cornus? It's not an easy question to answer, but there are specialist nurseries for this kind of thing who just specialise in making, and well, making, they don't make, they grow, in growing mature plants. So that's another big expense. They could be £200 or £300. They could be a couple of £1,000. So you have those. The more unusual, the more wow, the more that it's going to seduce the journalist and show visitors, the more expensive it is, actually. So this is where this £250,000 is going. And then finally, before we even get on to anything else, because we're a plant show really, you've got the trees. So where would you even begin to start to find a 100-year-old oak which hasn't been in the ground for long enough for you to move it? And what kind of machinery do you need to do that? Because a large mature oak tree, we're talking about 6-7 tons. You're right on the limit of machinery you can hire easily, and with contractors who have the license for it. So you're talking about a major construction issue, but unlike construction here, we're really saying that the amount of space between each person is really, really small. They've got 3 metres between the gardens and they're both sharing it, and they're both trying to get a ginormous telehandler, and they've both got about 50 people on their garden, all trying to make sure nothing gets marked, blemished or damaged. So logistically, it's a nightmare, and I can tell you that the contractors who build these things have a very short career, because after 2 or 3 of these, they either have a meltdown and they're never seen again, or they're just insane. So you have all of this going on. These trees can cost anything up to and beyond £50,000. I'm quite excited this year because I decided foolishly, or maybe not, I decided to come back to Chelsea. I hadn't done it for a few years. And we found the most extraordinary mulberry, which has been pollarded. So it looks like a very elaborate stump, and it's hollow in the middle, and it has beautiful long stems, and it's 120 years old. So what I love about that is that not only has somebody 10 years ago thought this is going to be taken out of the ground, but because our vernacular horticulture doesn't allow for that to have happened, it's come from the continent to here, and it's been taken from the ground, put in one of these bizarre pots that looks like a colander that cuts the roots all the time with air, so it makes it very fibrous, makes it very water-based, and then it's been put into a steel cage so you can lift it with a crane and you can transport it. And the really important thing about this is it doesn't even know it's happening. So it's got its own little ecosystem, so it can be driven around. And we've even developed the most extraordinary way of moving mature hedges, because you can now buy a 12-foot, an 8-foot hedge, which is very thick, very substantial, and its roots are grown in such a way that it doesn't even need to go in the ground for up to a week, and it won't notice, and it won't wilt. So these are kind of extraordinary developments. They've all been pioneered by show gardens. So you've got all of this going on. Then you've got extraordinary technical manufacturing taking place. You've got people making beautiful screens, making bespoke furniture, making pavilions, trying to tell you this story of magic which will transport you from the heart of London to, in a given year, China, Japan, South Africa, Malaysia. If you walk around that show, you can almost see somebody or something from somewhere else. And that's the great celebration of horticulture. It's a universal language. It doesn't have boundaries. It doesn't have nationalities. What it actually has is just a shared knowledge which we've built our entire civilization on. And these gardens kind of represent that. So that's quite exciting. You've got all of this going on. You've got a slightly deranged person who's foolish enough to call themselves garden designer. And they have a very extraordinary role in this whole thing because they've met this sponsor who gladly wants to hand over £250,000, £500,000, who really wants this beautiful garden because they understand all of these amazing benefits, not only to their consumers, but to their business partners and relations. They've got this strange person they've never really met before. They don't talk the same language because garden designers don't understand baseline. What we understand is how to propagate some random plant that nobody's seen for 50 years. So they have a weird little meeting. They decide it's going to work. The garden designer then goes off with an abstract drawing, builds this thing out of love, asks 50 to 100 people over the course of a year to follow this journey and to say, look, believe in me because I'm going to create this picture that everybody's going to love. These people all put their heart and soul into it. And we have this thing that we say, if you don't leave Chelsea absolutely exhausted and feel like you need a week in a convent in a darkened room that's cool so you can just get your head back together, then frankly you've not done a very good job and don't come back. So they all do this. They're all merrily, well not merrily, they moan a lot. I take moaning to be a very good sign. So they're all moaningly doing it for you. They're all loving this. You find the most extraordinary people. So there's a lady that travels every year from Japan so that she can pick over another designer's asters. And she gets on her hands and knees in her little knee pads with these tiny little scissors, and she's like, every day for 8 hours. And she happily does it with no pay. It's quite extraordinary. You find people from New Zealand coming to do exactly the same thing. I'm not so elaborate, I bring a few ladies from the Cotswolds with me, but they come with really nice lunch, so that's quite handy. And often if I say something like, oh, it's quite hot, isn't it? They say, do you want a drink? Shall I go and get it for you? And I think, yes, because I'm really lazy. So it goes on like this extraordinary journey. And in between it, we now face the dread of technology. We're not always that good at it, of social media. So you spend 8 hours every day or more. We get there at 7, we leave at 7. If it's not going so well, we try and stay a bit later and blag it. But we do all of this, and then we have to trundle back in the most appalling looking mud-soaked clothes through Sloane Square, which you can imagine brings horror to the ordinary residents thinking, who are these people? What are they doing here? So we trundle like this, knowing that when we get back, we've got a good hour where we've got to update Instagram, we've got to update Twitter, we've got to tell people how exciting it all is, and they really must come, and they really must follow this, and they really must like that. And then our PR agencies for our investor ring saying, well, what's happening that's unusual? Because so-and-so said this and you need to say this. So you have this whole extra body of work which is all around engagement, which is quite extraordinary. And then every now and then your investor will ring and say, is it going okay? And you say, yes, it's all very good, knowing full well that you're on the brink of some awful disaster because something that you planned months ago hasn't arrived on the right date, somebody's dropped something on their foot, it's all kind of like by a shoestring of tension. And then, as you get towards the end, an extraordinary thing happens because this is a busy site. There's lots of work, there's lots of noise, there's lots of dust, there's that dreaded pollen. But as you come towards the end of the build, the last 2 days, which is our assessing and judging, strange silence takes over as everybody, instead of being the great designer, the great diva, they all become very, very insular and kind of think, have I really done what I said I was going to do? Is it really as good as I hoped? What if nobody likes it? What if they think I'm hopeless, I'll never have a job again? So you go through all of this emotional roller coaster.